And I'd like to start with a word of prayer, so if you could kneel with me. O Lord our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You are such an amazing God, and we just thank you for all of your blessings. Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name give glory. And I just pray that I will be hidden in you today, that you will give me your words, that you will give me your thoughts, that your name only would be glorified, because this is your story, not mine. And I thank you so much for your leading, your mercy, and your guidance. In the holy name of Jesus I pray. Amen.
Amen.
It was a blessing when Kay asked me if I would share how the Lord has led in bringing me into the health message, because it made me go back and recall and put in order the many things the Lord has done. And I was kind of amazed myself at what he has done, because he's done a lot, and he's not finished with me yet. And so I'm going to divide this into two major sections. BC, before Christ, when I was still a worldly Lutheran, and then after I became an Adventist, because the story just keeps continuing. But I was the most unlikely candidate in the world to come into health reform. I was just an average, run-of-the-mill country girl from the dairy state of Wisconsin, with smoking, drinking, worldly parents on the standard America diet, or maybe I should say the standard Wisconsin diet of meat and dairy and cheese and cheese and cheese. And it was a pretty unhealthful lifestyle, except for my mother's huge garden, which I'm thankful for. Initially, the Lord used Lutherans to get me interested in health, which is very ironic, because there are no standards in the Lutheran Church at all. Anything goes. You know, it is not a sin to drink, it's not a sin to smoke, eat unclean meat. I mean, there are no standards. They have no idea, of what's in the Bible on health. And so I didn't either. I had no idea that there was any connection between God and health. And I didn't know the Bible hardly at all when I was a Lutheran, even though I graduated from a Lutheran college and had 24 credit hours in theology. I came out knowing really almost nothing and not having a personal relationship with the Lord. That's pretty bad, but that's the way it was. Lutheranism is just very formal, very liturgical, and God is just way up there somewhere, and you just don't have that personal relationship. And so I was basically a worldly. And all the other Lutherans that were in our church were the same way. We weren't much different than anybody else. Well, the journey started with my cousin Lois, who was a couple of years older than I was, and Lois was everything I wasn't. She was popular, and she was very intelligent and outgoing, and whatever she wanted to achieve, she managed to do very well. And so I unfortunately idolized her and really looked up to her. And she was the one that told me one day that I should read this book on sugar that she had read, because it had profoundly changed them. And she was a home economics teacher, and she said that when they went off sugar and switched over to honey as a sweetener, she lost weight and they were feeling better. And she said, this book is profound, you really need to read it. Well, because she was the one recommending it, I read the book. And I was just astonished at what was in that book. And I found out that sugar affected every organ and every cell of our body in a very, very negative way, and that so many health issues were attributed to sugar. And so I didn't want to eat that stuff either anymore. And so I switched over to honey also. And then I also decided that maybe I should have some orange juice, I think I decided in the morning. And I was not a fruit eater. We grew up having very little fruit in our home. Wisconsin is not exactly the banana belt, and so the only thing they could grow were apples, and in Door County, which is the thumb of Wisconsin, they grew cherries. And So we really didn't have much fruit, and I really didn't care for it because my parents didn't know that you were supposed to eat it when it was ripe. And so they would eat unripe bananas, and no wonder I didn't like it. And then my grandmother was very concerned because I wasn't eating fruit, and one day she bribed me into eating a pear, and she says, "I will give you $1 if you will eat this pear." Well, I'm a little girl, and $1's a lot of money in those days. And so I took the pear, and I bit into it, and it was like biting into an apple. And it was horrible. It wasn't ripe. But they didn't know better for some reason. And so I choked that thing down because I wanted that $1. But it certainly didn't convince me to eat fruit. So her motive didn't pan out. So anyhow, I made this change of getting off of sugar, and I started to have some orange juice. And the amazing thing was that just with those changes, I did not get sick for 3 years in a row. And before that, every winter I would get a cold or I would have flu or something, and I thought that was the winter way of life. It happened to everybody. I just thought that's what happened in winter. But when I didn't get sick for 3 years, I thought, wow, there is something to this. And the other thing that I noticed was that I had so much more energy. Now, I was young, granted, I was only in my 20s, but I was so full of energy that I would come home from work and I'd have to go out jogging to burn it off because I just was brimming with all this energy that I didn't know what to do with. Well, the second Lutheran that the Lord used in the next step of this journey was my own sister Pat, who is 16 months younger than myself, and she had a health issue that doctors were not being very successful in resolving, and she didn't want to go the surgery route. And someone told her that there was this herbalist in Madison, which was just a couple of hours from where we lived. We lived right in the middle of the state, and that this herbalist could probably help her with her issue. And so she went down there, and this herbalist had been trained by Dr. John Christopher, the famous herbalist. He was a Mormon, and she had learned directly from him. And so this woman put my sister on a vegan diet. Actually, it was Dr. John Christopher's, it's called mucusless diet, which is vegan. He does use a few things that I now know are not healthful. At that time, I didn't know any better. So she went on that, and she was also given some herbs that were specific for her problem, and she had great results. And so she was highly motivated to keep eating more healthfully and doing things more naturally. And so she was encouraging me, and telling me about her experience and encouraging me to eat more healthfully. Eventually, I too went and visited this herbalist and learned more about herbs. Well, because I had switched off of sugar and into honey, I wanted to learn more how to use honey, like in baking, how much do you use, and I didn't know the proportions. So I found my way to a health food store, and I just started looking around, and I found this little cookbook, and it was a vegetarian cookbook. And so I bought it, and I started experimenting. And I found that it had a whole foods in it. It wasn't a vegan book, but it was vegetarian. But I found that the whole foods were so tasty. And I was really enjoying just experimenting with different foods. I started using seeds, like sunflower seeds I'd never used before. And I started using nuts and the whole grains rather than the refined grains. And I was thoroughly enjoying the taste of all the foods that I was experimenting with. And then my cousin, Lois, gives me a big, thick cookbook, a vegetarian cookbook, but it also had a lot of nutritional information in it. And so I had that to explore. And to this day, I still refer to that book because it has such good nutritional information in it. And at some point, I don't know how, I learned that 1 in 4 people were going to be getting cancer, and somehow I learned that meat caused cancer. I don't know how I knew that, but I was starting to mingle with more health-oriented people, and so maybe that was the reason. And so I decided to cut back on my meat consumption quite a bit. I didn't cut it out totally at that point, but I cut way back. I'd also been a huge milk drinker, and somehow, I guess from this herbalist, had learned that dairy products were very mucus-forming and therefore led to infections and they just were not healthy foods to eat. So I discontinued drinking milk altogether, which was amazing because going back to my infancy, when I was born, there were no infant formulas that agreed with me. And all I did was cry all the time, I am told, and that they didn't know what to do with me. In fact, they left me in the hospital for a while, longer, after my mother went home, trying to figure out what to feed me. And finally they gave up and sent me home because they were tired of this crying baby. And so my parents didn't know what to do with me either. And so after 3 months, they put me on cow's milk, which is the worst thing you can do for an infant. But unfortunately, I quit crying. And so I had cow's milk, and that did a lot of damage. I won't go into all that, but it's permanent. I still suffer today from that big mistake. And then unfortunately, because I was on cow's milk, I loved it, and so I just drank a huge amount of it up until my mid to late 20s. Well, I kept going back to the health food store, and one day I was in there, and I was just exploring these shelves, because a lot of these things were new to me, and I just wanted to find out what was healthy. So I see this can of food, and on the top it says Loma Linda. And I thought, well, that's a weird name for food. I had no idea that that was a city in California. And I'm from Wisconsin, what do I know? I'm just a country girl. And so I thought, Loma Linda, that's weird. And I can't remember if it was a can of Frank's or what it was, but I turned it around and I looked at the ingredients and I thought, this isn't healthy. What is this doing in a health food store? I'm not going to eat this. And I don't remember, what the ingredients were. And I don't think it was an Adventist health food store, but I don't know. So anyhow, I just thought, okay, not everything in the health food store is necessarily a healthful food to eat. So although when I was there, on the counter, they had these free passes to the National Health Federation convention in Chicago. And I was given a free pass. And I thought, I'm going to go. I want to learn more. This is great, a free pass. And it wasn't terribly far. It was in the suburbs, so it wasn't terribly far from where I was living because when I finished college in the Chicago area, I just stayed there and kept working. So I'm living in the Chicago area. So I go to this convention, and they have big name speakers, secular in the health field. And like Dr. John Christopher was there. I heard him speak in person, and Betty Morales, and I don't even remember all the names, but there were a lot of big names in the world in the health field that would speak there. And this was in a huge venue with lots of booths. And so I would walk around trying to gather all the information I could possibly get on health and learn whatever I could learn. But what I found out is that there was a lot of confusion, that one would say do this and the other one would say do that. It was Babylon, confusion. And so I was very confused as to what the truth in healthful eating really was. And I began to wonder if there was such a thing as truth in health. Is there such a thing? I was seeking for it, and I wasn't finding it. I was finding a lot of confusion. And so I finally decided, I guess I just have to decide for myself what I'm going to do and do it. Just make up my own plan, what I think is healthy, and just do it because I can't find truth on this subject. Well, later on, I was working for a large corporation, the Quasar Corporation in Franklin Park, Illinois, and there was a woman, a lot of people working there. It was just huge, and a woman that I had become friends with. Actually, when I got to know her, she wasn't any particular religion, and then she met a man, and they were trying to decide what religion to get married under, and they decided to go Catholic, and so they became Catholics. And shortly thereafter, the Lord rescued them and put some Adventists in their life, and they took Bible studies, and they became Adventists. And so she would see what I was eating for lunch, and she would ask me, oh, what are you eating? That looks healthfully. And she's trying to learn more about health because now she's an Adventist. So she's asking me, the Lutheran, which is kind of backwards, but so I'm just sharing what little I know with her. And there was another Adventist employee working there, and she told me about him. And I don't remember if she made this arrangement or how this happened, but he gave me a book called Counsel on Diets and Foods. It was a soft-covered book, and I had no idea who the author was, or, I didn't know anything. And I look at this book, and I thought, this is kind of a weird book, because I didn't understand it being a compilation. And I'd look at one subject, and then it would repeat it again here and there, and things kind of jumped around. And I read a little bit here and a little bit there, but I was having a hard time making heads or tails out of it. And so I didn't finish reading it at that time. I set it aside, but I didn't get rid of it. I kept it. And then I continued in my search and in this journey, but I'm still drinking alcohol. I have this very lopsided approach. I wasn't an alcoholic or anything, but I was a social drinker. And when I went out, to the single bars, the night spots, the nightclubs, you would drink. That's what you did. And so I was still drinking. But I moved from the suburbs to Chicago after a few years because I was going to start teaching in a Lutheran school. That was my original intention after college, but due to bad decisions that didn't happen right away, it took a few years before I could actually start teaching. And so I started my job as a kindergarten teacher in the Lutheran school. I moved into Chicago, and it is traditional in kindergarten classes to have snack time. At least even when I was a girl, we always had a snack time. And so each child would be assigned a certain day that they were to bring the snack for that day. And because I had learned about sugar, I didn't want parents sending sugar treats because I didn't want a classroom full of children bouncing off the walls that I had to try to control after they had sugar. And so I sent home a letter with guidelines that we weren't going to be using sugar in our snacks, and here are all kinds of ideas, things that you could bring that would be healthy snacks. And I was amazed at how cooperative these parents were. I never had a problem. Now, granted, I wouldn't eat a lot of those things now because I didn't know better, but based on my understanding at that time, they did a wonderful job, and they were very creative in the snacks that they sent, and it went very, very well. Because I had sent that letter home, one of the parents was very interested in health, and she was trying to feed her children healthfully, a Lutheran mother, and she starts talking to me about health after school. And she loved to discuss the topic. She just loved to stop and talk with me. And she was a really sweet lady. She was trying to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, have for her family fresh food. And one day after school, she said to me, there is going to be a health lecture here in Chicago. And I was not familiar with the name of the person that was going to be speaking, but I went. And it turned out to be Paul Stitt. You might not be familiar with that name, but he was a biochemist that had worked for Quaker Oats and another large food corporation. And he had done research while he was at Quaker Oats on rats. He had them on 4 different types of diets, and what he was really trying to discern was if the puffed wheat was healthful and the cereals that they were making. And I don't have time to go into it. There are articles online. It's a fascinating study on rats, and the bottom line was that within 2 weeks he was killing the rats on puffed wheat. And I think I'm going to give these articles to you, Kay, because you might want to put them in Health Rec. They are so interesting. I didn't think of this till yesterday. I would have done this sooner. But it is fascinating reading what he discovered. And so I providentially learned not to eat puffed grains at that point. And there's puffed everything now, puffed rice and rice cakes and all kinds of things. But it was destroying these rodents' organs. It was affecting their liver, their pancreas, their kidneys. It was just doing great damage. I actually talked to Paul one time on the phone years later after I was an Adventist, and I said, have you ever done these experiments on humans? He said, no way, I'd kill them. He said I couldn't do it. He says it was destroying the protein in their bodies. And so it was very interesting talking to him. Well, besides getting those parents in my classroom to bring healthy treats, which they did. I also did a cooking project once a month with my kindergarten class, and I had learned this in student teaching, that it was a good idea to do this because you would take the recipe and put it on, big paper with big letters, and And they were learning reading, and they were learning math because you're using fractions, a fourth of a cup, a half a cup, and they're learning science. You know, there's chemical changes, things that happen when you bake and things. And so I would try to choose what I thought was a healthy recipe, and we'd do this once a month, and the children would have to help me make it, and they loved it. You know, they'd have to come up and put the ingredients in the bowl and stir it, and then we'd go over to the church, which was a few feet away, and to the kitchen, and we'd bake it or cook it or whatever it was. And that was our snack for that day. And they loved to eat it because they made it, and they were so excited about it. And so it was a lot of fun doing this project with them. And another thing that I started was a health newsletter for the parents. I think I sent that out once a month. It was just a short, maybe one-page letter with just little tips that I got from the health books that I was collecting or a recipe. And the mother that was interested in health, her name was Esther, she was thrilled, you know, to get all this information. Well, at that time, I was dating a man that I had met at Quasar. He, just about the time I was getting ready to leave, he was hired, he was an executive, and we were dating, broke up once or twice, but one of the times when he broke off with me, one of the reasons was because of my diet. And I thought, okay, this is not going to work. I'm going to have to find a man that's a vegetarian. And how am I going to do this? And so I was getting a subscription to the Vegetarian Times, and I noticed in the back they had classified ads, and there were men advertising for women and women advertising for men. So I thought, I'm going to try this because I'm just not going to have harmony, you know, with a man if we're not eating the same diet. This is just not going to work. So I put an ad in the paper, in this magazine, and I'm bombarded with mail. This is back in snail mail days. There wasn't computers. And I get all this mail, and most of it's from prisoners. Well, I was not interested in meeting a prisoner by any means, and so I narrowed it down to just, you know, one or two or three that looked like possibilities. And so I replied to one of the letters that looked like might be a possibility. And so we met. He took me out for dinner, and at that time I was not still completely a vegetarian. I was, you know, majority of the time. But if I went out on a date, I would order seafood usually, or once in a while chicken, because I was being told that those were the safer meats rather than beef or pork. And so he found out when we were ordering that I wasn't a total vegetarian. He was. He was not eating any meat. I think he was a little disappointed. And so, you know, it was nice, but, you know, we weren't really interested in each other at all. So it was just kind of that one-time thing. So I thought, okay, now what am I going to try? Well, I think it might have been the same magazine that I learned that there was a vegetarian society in Chicago. And I thought, I'm going to go to their meeting. Maybe there'll be a vegetarian man there. I can be. So it's not a very big group. In fact, I think they were meeting in someone's apartment. And I go to this meeting, and sure enough, there's a man there, and he gets interested in me, and he wants to start talking to me. And I don't even remember, this is so long ago, if we went out on a date or not, but I knew that I was not interested in him. I think he appeared a little bit effeminate to me, and I wasn't too interested, so that didn't go anywhere. So I'm kind of at a dead end, and I'm kind of just giving up on this idea of a vegetarian man because I don't know how to find one. And so then after a couple of years of teaching in Chicago, I ended up moving to the northwest suburbs to teach at another school, and then ended up going back into the business world and working in business offices for a while. And backing up a little bit, prior to this, my sister, Pat, the one that had encouraged me to eat more healthfully, had gone to a doctor in our hometown area there in central Wisconsin, whom she absolutely loved. And it turns out that my cousin Lois had gone to the same doctor, and he had delivered one or two of each of their children. And they were raving about this doctor. And it turns out that he was a Seventh-day Adventist doctor. And they just said he was the nicest doctor, the staff was the nicest, his wife worked there, she was wonderful. They couldn't say enough wonderful things about this practice. So my sister said to me, if you ever do need a doctor, you should go to a Seventh-day Adventist doctor because they're not going to bug you about how you're eating. And the reason she said that was years ago, prior to this, I had an issue that I went to the doctor for, and she'd give me a drug, and the drug would cause a different problem, and I'd go back, and then the drug would cause a different problem. And she was giving me a hard time about my change in diet. And she said, there is nothing to that health food stuff. That's just bogus, you know. Now, this woman was obese. She was always sick. Her nose was always running. And I was very slim and quite healthy other than this one problem. And I thought, I don't believe you for a minute, you know. I do not believe that I'm going to stay, you know, in the direction I'm going. So that's why my sister had said, if you go to an Adventist doctor, they will not bug you about how you're eating. So the time came, oh, and I had just quit going to doctors after that experience with this obese doctor, because by then I'm starting to learn about herbs. And I thought, I don't need to go to a doctor. I'm going to do things naturally. And so I had been learning about herbs, and I started taking some herbs, and so I hadn't been to a doctor for a long time. But I came to a situation where I was going to need some medical attention, and I remembered what my sister said, you should go to a Seventh-day Adventist doctor. So I looked in the phone book, and I thought, well, how in the world do you find a Seventh-day Adventist doctor in the phone book? It doesn't say Seventh-day Adventist after their name in the phone book. How am I going to do this? And so I called my sister, and I said, help. How do I find a Seventh-day Adventist doctor? She said, I'll ask mine if he knows anybody down there in Chicago. So he does. He gives her this list that she sends to me, and they're all in Hinsdale. And I'm way up in the northwest suburbs, and that's quite a distance away, and I thought, why are they all in the same spot? This is weird. Well, it turns out that there's an Adventist hospital. The Hinsdale Hospital is an Adventist hospital, and that's why they were all congregated in this same area. So I was debating what to do. I thought, man, that's a long way to drive. Do I really want to do this? And then I thought, I'll just try it once and see if I like them. So I just kind of, you know, eeny, meeny, miny, moe, pick a doctor, and made an appointment, and drive all the way down there, and he was wonderful. So nice. Introduces me to his charge nurse, or we would say head nurse now, I guess. She was so friendly, so vivacious, so outgoing, and it was a very positive experience. And she started to befriend me, and she started calling me and asked me to do things with her, and I thought she was angelic because she didn't go to the bars and she didn't drink, and she was just so different, and I could hardly comprehend her, you know, but she was being so nice to me. And she invited me to her church. And I went, and it was weird. There was no liturgy, there was no formalism, it wasn't reverent, it didn't feel like church. I couldn't understand a thing they were saying in Sabbath school. But I was looking forward to what she would have planned afterwards, because she would always have something very nice planned afterwards. There are a lot of beautiful nature things to do in Chicago area, believe it or not. There are forest preserves, there's an arboretum, there's a place called Cantigny, which is just gorgeous. It's like a southern plantation. Right, Dennis? Was that the one? Yeah. And there's just all kinds of wonderful things to do, or she'd have a picnic planned or something. But this one time, and I didn't always go when she invited me, and she didn't push it. She just invited me once in a while. And I didn't always go because I didn't like it, but I liked what she had planned for the afternoon part. That part was always really nice. Well, one time she said, there's going to be a little like potluck type lunch in one of the in an apartment of one of the single gals, and this is all for single young women. And I thought, oh, I want to go to that, because my sister had told me that Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarians, and so they must know something about health. So if I go, I'm going to learn a lot about health. So I was really looking forward to this. And so we get there, and I look over the big spread on the table, and there's like nothing good to eat. I mean, it was so bad. And I thought, what in the world is wrong here? Why are these people vegetarians when they don't even know how to eat healthfully? I just couldn't figure it out, because I had no idea that there was any connection between diet and spirituality at this point. You know, all I knew was, you know, what I was gathering here and there and trying to piece this together. And I think I might have found celery sticks and carrot sticks and maybe a vegetable to eat, but I wasn't going to eat the sugar and what looked like Jell-O to me, and, you know, all the other things that I knew were not healthful. And so I left there extremely disappointed and hungry. And I just thought, these people are so weird. They're so nice, but the religion is so weird. What a missed opportunity. What a missed opportunity that those women had. Because if they would have been living the truth, I would have been eating out of their hand. I would have been open to anything because I was searching for the truth, and they weren't living up to it. So it's a whole different story how I became an Adventist in spite of Adventists, and I don't have time for that one today. But anyhow, the Lord is merciful. That's all I can say. The Lord is merciful, and He doesn't give up. He kept working for me and in my behalf to lead me to where He wanted me to be. And because of the connection with this nurse, long story short, I did go to an evangelistic series and become a Seventh-day Adventist, miraculously. And I was thrilled when I heard the message, the health message given at the evangelistic meetings. I had never heard of such a thing. And he had us, it was Mark Finley, everybody got the same Bible, and he had us looking up every single verse. And it was so powerful to see it with your own two eyes. I couldn't believe how powerful it was. And so he would show you all the verses, and I was just thrilled that the Lord had a health message and that He cared about us, and that there was such a thing as truth and health. I was just elated. And so it was just a real important factor in me becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, although I accepted all the truth. It was all just right there in the Bible. I couldn't deny it. It was there. So now this is section 2, after becoming an Adventist. Well, immediately I was asked to be on the personal ministries committee. And I don't know why, but I was. And I immediately saw that this church was in great need of health information, and they didn't know anything about health. And so, and this is a church, Hinsdale Church, very large because it's in the medical community, and so there's a lot of medical professionals going to this church. And the membership that year was 1,324 people in this one church. And once a month I had to give a personal ministries report. And so I decided to arrange for some cooking classes because I thought they needed it. And so this Mormon herbalist that I and my sister had gone to had an assistant who was a Seventh-day Adventist woman. And somehow I found out about that, and so I invited her to come down to Chicago area and to do classes at the Hinsdale Church, which she did do. We didn't have a huge turnout, but the people that came seemed interested, and my nurse friend came, and I was glad because she needed it. She was eating pretty awfully. And so after becoming an Adventist, I joined the choir, and that led to me joining the Hinsdale Brass Ensemble, and we were I only rehearsed with them 1 week, and the following week we had to play special music for an evangelistic series out in the suburbs by Mark Finley. And we had to wait quite a while backstage before we could go on and play. And while we were standing there just mingling and talking, one of the musicians came up and started talking to me, and it turned out that he was very interested in learning more about health. Long story short, a few months later, I have a vegetarian husband by the name of Dennis. Amen. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Well, that led to an interesting journey. It started a new journey for us because a few months after we were married, Dennis was laid off from his job, and we had been praying even before we were married that He would get us out of the city. Dennis had showed me where the Lord was going to destroy all the cities, and specifically named Chicago as one of them. We knew we had to get out. We knew we needed to get into the country. We are fervently praying. So when the Lord, when he got laid off, we thought the Lord was just opening the door. Oh, well, now we can go and get into the country maybe. And so, but Dennis also wanted to work for the Lord. I was working at that time for the Hinsdale Hospital. I wasn't working in the hospital, but I was working for them in the satellite facility marketing department. It was just two of us, my boss and I, and we were setting up practices for the doctors coming out of the residency program. And so Dennis wanted to also do something working for the Lord in an Adventist ministry, and so we were checking all over the United States. We were looking at health institutions and church institutions, and nothing was materializing. But eventually, another long story short, he got hired by Pacific Press, which at that time was set up in Nampa. And so the Lord moved us to Idaho, and we were thrilled. All that I knew about Idaho is that they grew potatoes, so it must be in the country. And so I was thrilled that we were moving to Idaho, and it started a wonderful journey. I met a Seventh-day Adventist chiropractor shortly after we moved, and she was very vivacious and friendly, and she loved the health message, and we talked frequently about health and diet. And one day she said to me, I am going to do a health seminar for my patients, and I'm going to bring in a number of Seventh-day Adventist doctors. There were several in our area, and they're going to give the health lectures, and you're going to do the cooking classes. And I said, oh, I don't know how to do that. She says, oh, yes, you do, and I have an assistant lined up to help you. And so I did not think I could do this. And I couldn't, but the Lord could. And so Doris and I did it. We did these health classes. But what was very interesting about the seminar is that when the doctors got up and did their part, they're telling the people to eat these meat substitutes, and their lectures were horrible. And I thought, they don't know anything about health. And I was just flabbergasted that these Seventh-day Adventist doctors were not giving God's health message. And it gave me courage, and it gave me confidence that I could do a better job than that. And so the Lord was preparing me for much, much more. Well, I was still a fairly new Adventist, because I wasn't even an Adventist for a year when Dennis and I got married. And so I was praying that the Lord would just show me what he wanted me to change, because I thought the Lord was going to be here in like a couple of years, probably before I was even middle-aged. And I looked at all those Spirit of Prophecy books, and I said, Lord, there is no way I can get through all those books before you come. And I want to know what I have to know, so please tell me what I need to change, because I can't read all those books fast enough. And so I was really pleading with the Lord to show me. And the Lord does not ignore a prayer like that. And what did he do? But he sends a medical missionary into our area. And she needed some volunteer help, we found out through a pastor who was volunteering himself and his wife. And so we started going over to help her, and she was in the process of trying to set up a lifestyle center, and she needed lots of help. Well, because of that connection, we were starting to learn some more things about diet, because we would all eat together while we were working there, where there were several other volunteers. And then after a period of time, she started to have some problems with her landlord, and he was threatening to lock her out. And so Dennis was volunteering one Friday. I wasn't with him that day, and he had pity on this couple, and they were very stressed, this medical missionary and her husband. So he invited them to our house for the weekend. I didn't know this was happening until they walked in the door, and on a Friday afternoon. And so not only are they moving in with just a suitcase, but it's one box after another box after another box. And I'm going, oh, well, what in the world's going on here? You know? And the weekend turned into 5.5 weeks that they lived with us. But it was a little bit stressful because of my job and different reasons that I can't go into right now. But anyhow, because she was living with us, we learned so much. She was teaching us all the principles that were in the Counsel in Diet and Foods books. And she was, I mean, you know, every night practically was school at our house. And so we learned health reform, we learned dress reform, we learned holiday reform. We learned about who the self-supporting ministries were, the Present Truth ministries, and who the Present Truth speakers were. And I mean, she just told us everything, and we just accepted everything, and we're just happy to learn it. And so we literally made changes overnight. We went to a 2-meal plan rather than 3 meals a day. We started eating at specific meal times. We eliminated baking soda, baking powder, oil, drinking with our meals. I mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything that she was teaching us, we just did. We were so eager and so hungry to do this. And so we were thrilled with the changes. And the nice part of it is that Dennis and I were on the same page. We wanted to do this together. That's not always the case, and I know that can be very hard. But if you're in that situation, keep moving forward. The Lord says, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and we could add or spouse. And so we need to move forward and lovingly share the truth and try to encourage a spouse if they're not on the same page with us. But we were just thrilled to be learning these truths, and the Lord was answering the longing of my heart to know more. Psalm 107:9, which we read in Sabbath school today, says, "For he satisfieth the longing soul and filleth the hungry soul with goodness." And he most certainly did that. So at the time that all this was going on, I was working as the director of a crisis pregnancy center, which was an evangelical Christian ministry to minister to girls and women in unplanned crisis pregnancies. So we were pro-life but not activists. And while I was there, there were volunteers. All the people that worked there were volunteers. I had to train the hotliners and the counselors in very intensive training. And then they could start working, but even then I still had to work with them for quite a while before they would be ready to counsel on their own. But because I was making changes in my diet, some of the volunteer counselors were noticing what I was eating, and they started asking me questions, and they were very interested, and they said, "Would you teach us how to eat healthfully?" And so I started just having these little classes in my home, teaching some of our volunteers. And the Lord was starting to open doors that I wasn't opening. People were starting to send people to me to help them with health, and we started receiving all kinds of health newsletters from various health ministries or lifestyle centers, and we started eventually started attending conservative camp meetings, and they always had health lectures, and we got to hear people like Agatha Thrash and Thomas Jackson and so many more. And so the Lord just kept giving us more and more information, just all the time, left and right. But while I was still working at the Crisis Pregnancy Center, I just started to feel that because the Lord was opening all these doors, and I had learned a lot about lifestyle, and I was having a hard time squeezing everything into my schedule to live a healthy lifestyle and to do all the cooking and gardening and food preservation and all the things I was learning that we were supposed to be doing, and work. I was having a hard time juggling. I remember one night I was canning till 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, this isn't being temperate. I'm not getting my sleep. I'm not doing what the Lord has asked us to do. I can't do all this. And so I asked Dennis if I could quit working, quit my job, because I said, I want to live the Lord's lifestyle, and I feel like he's calling me to give the 3 angels message, specifically in health, because he kept opening all these doors. I wasn't doing it. It was him. And so Dennis said, as soon as we're out of debt, you can quit working. And so we paid off our debts, and the only debt left was a mortgage. And at that time, Dennis didn't think a mortgage was a debt, and so he let me quit working, praise the Lord. Eventually, he learned it was a debt, and we got out of debt. But I was able to quit working, and the Lord did continue to open doors all over the place. And because we were getting a number of newsletters, one of them that someone had told me about was written by a woman in California by the name of Katie, and she was a health researcher, a prolific writer, and she was writing books and tracts, and she was just full of information. And so I talked to her on the phone, and she, providentially, the Lord worked it out that they were going to be coming to our area, because I think the reason was there was a Seventh-day Adventist little publisher in our area It was just this guy and his parents. And she was going to have him do some publishing for her, and I think she was coming for that reason. And so we had her stay at our house, which was wonderful, because I had just finished reading one of her books, and I had 50 questions I needed to ask her, and I wouldn't let her leave the next morning until she answered all 50 of my questions. And she did. She was very gracious, and because I wanted to learn more. Well, in her newsletter, she one time, and I learned a lot from her newsletters. She just had so much good health information. Well, in one of the newsletters, she told about another new health journal that was starting by a woman by the name of Lori, and she was based in central Wisconsin, near where I'm from, not too far away. Well, that really interested me, and so I was on the phone with Lori and found out, learned some things from her, and providentially, the Lord arranged for them to come and visit us because they were going on a road trip and coming to the West to visit family, and they were going to be going right through our area. So we got to meet Lori. And in Lori's newsletter, she was advertising for more recipes, because in their newsletter, this was the original one, there were articles, and she had gathered quite a staff. She had contributing editors, nutritional and food consultants, and consulting editors, and medical doctors for consultants, and she had a recipe editor, and so she had gathered all kinds of people to help her do this. And as I was looking through here, the first articles by Dr. Richard Hansen. Does that name ring a bell? and she had other people, that were very knowledgeable about health. And in the center of the newsletter, there were always 4 pages of recipes, and it was made so that you could take these out and start a notebook and have recipes. And I remember looking through these 4 pages of recipes, and I'm thinking, I could never be that recipe editor. How in the world does she do this? Well, then Lori comes and visits us, and because she had these little ads asking for recipes, she had this little card, wanted, all your best recipes, right? So I thought, well, I can give her some recipes when she comes. So I gathered up a bunch of recipes. And before they left, I gave her this pile of recipes. And she turns to me and she said, in 6 months, I'm going to be losing my recipe editor. Would you be my recipe editor? I said, oh, I couldn't do that. And she said, you pray about it. And I did. And providentially, we were going to be going back to Wisconsin and Illinois to visit family in a few months. And so I told her we were coming, and we arranged to meet. Her husband was an Adventist pastor, and so we went to one of his churches. He had several that he was going to be preaching at that weekend. They had pre-invited us for lunch at their home, and she said, I will give you all the materials you need and all the recipe books and everything that you need to be the recipe editor. And I was afraid to commit because I didn't think I could do it. And I said, I will try it for 1 month, and then I'll let you know what I think and how it goes. So I go home with all this stuff, and I start working on the first issue. This newsletter came out once a month, so I just would have to do this once a month. And I love poring over recipes. I love changing recipes. And I found out that I love doing it. I absolutely loved doing this job. And I did it for 5 years, a job that I didn't think I could ever do. The Lord gave me the wherewithal to do it. And so he was just amazing how he was leading. Well, after we decided to get out of debt, we sold our home to get rid of our mortgage, and we had to find some place to live real quick. And we ended up in Boise. The last place I wanted to live was a bigger area, but temporarily we ended up living in Boise. And while we were there, I started attending some Boise community education classes, which were either free or a couple of dollars for materials. And they would hold them at various public schools and different venues. And it was wonderful because you could take gardening, you could take tree pruning, you could take powder puff mechanics. I mean, they offered all kinds of stuff for virtually almost nothing. And so I was taking classes because it was a lot of fun. But because I was doing that, they also call you to evaluate the classes, the office that runs it. And they called me one time and I evaluated the class. And after I got done with the evaluation, the woman says, have you ever considered being an instructor for us? And I actually had, but I hadn't moved in that direction. But when she asked me, I felt like the Lord was opening the door. And I said, yes, I've thought about it. And she said, what would you teach? And I told her. She said, oh, there's a need for that. Yes, we want you to teach. And so I said I'd teach natural health and cooking classes. So I started teaching for the Boise Community Ed program, and I did several series. And it was very rewarding because I found out that the people in the world were more eager to learn about health than Adventists many times. In fact, the very, very first class that I did was on improving digestion. And I was very nervous because I didn't know what to expect. And there was a lady in this class, and just about everything I said, she would say, right on, you're right on, that's right. And she just kept doing this throughout the class, and I thought, who is this lady? And afterwards, she wanted to speak with me, and she said, have you read this book? And I'd never seen the book. I wasn't familiar. She said, everything you're saying is in this book. And I don't even think it was the Seventh-day Adventist book, I don't know. But it was just so encouraging that the Lord gave me this lady for my very first class, because it encouraged me to do many more classes. Well, after doing several series, I decided that instead of doing the cooking class portion, because I would usually do lectures and then I would do the cooking classes, I decided instead of doing the cooking classes under the auspices of community ed, that I would offer those at my home. First of all, it'd be a whole lot easier than dragging half my kitchen with me all the time. But the other reason was then I could share further truth and spiritual truths, because I wouldn't be under their umbrella. And so that was a real joy to do that. And even though our home was extremely tiny, they all crowded around our little table. And it was a very positive experience to do that. Well, then we moved out into a more rural community. We still weren't quite in the country, but we were getting close. And I was being asked by churches to give classes in the churches. I was being asked to write articles for their church newsletters, for websites, and the Lord just kept me really, really busy. But when I was doing these classes, I would just give recipe handouts. I would, just the recipes that I was using, recipes that I had changed to make them healthy. And there really wasn't one cookbook that I recommended, and there were several that I would, but they all had something that wasn't quite in line with the spirit of prophecy, but I did have a list of recommended ones. But I would just give them handouts of recipes. And sometimes the students in the class would say, you should write a cookbook. And I said, I could never do that. No, I'm not writing a cookbook. And so then another class would come and they say, well, you should write a cookbook. And I said, no, I can't do that. I'm not writing a cookbook. And I kept saying this. And then one day Katie called me from California. And Katie said to me, you should write a cookbook. Now, I had high respect for Katie because she was so knowledgeable about health, and I learned so much from her. And for some reason, when she asked me, it had impact. And I said to Dennis, I think the Lord wants me to write a cookbook. And I am not a writer, but we wrote a cookbook. I'm not a writer, but I married a man who's a writer and an editor. And so he cleaned up my messes for me and in writing, and that was a blessing. And so we were getting ready to publish. This was 1996. And Katie calls. And she has some things she wants to tell me about. And she said, I want to tell you about excitotoxins because a neurosurgeon by the name of Dr. Russell Blaylock had recently written a book called Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. And we had excitotoxins in our cookbook. And so in the form of Bragg liquid aminos and protein seasonings, like Dr. Bronner's and Dr. Jensen's protein seasoning. And so she educates us about excitotoxins, and it was devastating because if you've read the article in our cookbook or the article out in the health rack, you will know that it causes Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's disease, multiple sclerosis, cancer, tinnitus, GERD, you name it, it causes it. It's awful. And this had a real impact on me at that time because my own mother was dying from Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. In fact, she would die the very next year at the age of 72, and she had had this for almost 10 years. And so it had a real impact. I didn't want to follow in her footsteps. We went off of those excitotoxins altogether immediately. I had a gallon of Bragg liquid aminos that went down the drain. But the struggle was in my freezer, my kitchen freezer, were all kinds of loaves that I had made and patties with excitotoxins in them. And I don't want to waste food. I was raised that way, and the Lord says we're not to waste a morsel. And so what am I going to do with this food? All that work, all that money, and it's full of excitotoxins that I shouldn't be eating, and I struggled. We didn't eat it anymore, but I struggled, and I was having a hard time doing something with food in that freezer. But one day this thought went through my mind. What if one more bite of that food puts you over the edge and you get one of those diseases? And thinking about my mother, I couldn't do it. I threw all that food away. There were no more excitotoxins in our home. Interestingly enough, just prior to Katie calling us and informing us about this, I was using one of the protein seasonings once in a while in the evening if I got hungry, because we didn't eat a third meal, but once in a while if I was somewhat hungry, I would take a little bit of this powder and mix it with warm water, hot water, and make it into a broth. And I would just drink it and it would satisfy me. But I started to notice that every time that I did this, I would get this weird feeling right across my forehead. Weird. And I thought, why is it when I drink this that happens? And one day when I was drinking it, the thought went through my head, avoid adulterated substances. Now in the Spirit of Prophecy and Counsel on Diet Foods, it says we are to avoid adulterated substances. I think it's on page 85 of Counsel on Diet Foods. And at the time I didn't catch on what the Lord was trying to reveal to me. But praise the Lord, Katie did. And then I realized what he was trying to tell me prior to Katie's call, that we shouldn't be eating those adulterated substances. Well, here we are with a cookbook with some of these in them, these products. And so we didn't go to publishing, and we took an entire year to revise any recipes that had excitotoxins in them. And it was a lot of work. We just had to keep experimenting. But I called Dennis the man for all seasonings because he was really good at coming up with different combinations. Well, let's try a little dill, let's try oregano, let's try a little this and that. And he was really good at experimenting. And at mealtime, it was just a big experiment trying to rework all these recipes. And so a year later, we were finally ready to go into publishing, which we did. And let's see, 1997, that was 1997. So in the fall of 97, the Lord literally gave us a country home, which happened to be laid out perfectly for giving classes, giving lectures, doing cooking classes, for hospitality, and the Lord used that home just for those very things. And we were asked to house many speakers, missionaries, groups. We were very busy. The Lord really used that home. And one of the speakers that we had to house in 1999 was Danny Vera, because he was asked to speak in the area. And he always would have a yearly health crusade down in Lodi, and we never attended it, nor had we planned to. However, because he was in our home, he twisted our arm to come to his crusade that summer because he needed volunteer helpers for his book booth, and so we went. But the bonus was that none other than Dr. Russell Blaylock was going to be speaking at that particular meeting. And so we went, and we are sitting in this huge venue. If you've ever been there, it's just enormous. He would have it at the Lodi Grape Festival venue. And so it's a huge place with lots of chairs, and a lot of people would come, even people, worldly people, because he didn't have just Seventh-day Adventist speakers. He would also use non-Adventist speakers. And so we were sitting in the audience listening to some lecturer, and I looked down the row to the left of me, and there's several empty seats. But beyond that is sitting Dr. Blaylock and his wife in this huge place right down the row from us. And I said to Dennis, as soon as this meeting is over, we're going to go and make a beeline right to him and talk to him, because I wanted to ask him my burning question, which was, is Bragg liquid aminos really an excitotoxin? Because in his book, he doesn't say that, and in his lectures, he won't specifically name products. But I wanted to hear it directly from him so that I had the authority, in sharing this information with others. And so we went right to Dr. Blaylock. I asked him my question, and he smiled, and he says, I get that question asked a lot. And, excuse me. And he said, yes, it is. So we were so blessed. You know, the Lord just providentially sends us to Lodi when we weren't planning to, because he had providentially put Danny in our home, and now he providentially puts Dr. Blaylock in our row so we can talk to him. And we had a good half hour or more with Dr. Blaylock and his wife, just alone, talking with him, standing there, which led to us giving him our cookbook, which he took home and reviewed and wrote the beautiful endorsement that's on the back of that cookbook, if you've read it, and you know, saying it's excitotoxin free. What a blessing. Who would have known, you know, that the Lord had this all orchestrated and we had no idea that this was going to happen. Well, our cookbooks were in storage after we moved up here for an entire year. And so Dennis had to take them off of eBay and Amazon because they were trapped in storage. We couldn't get to them until last December. So finally, he decided to put them back online. And as he was doing that, he saw that there were some reviews. And I share this one review with you not because to glorify ourselves, because the diet is not ours, it's God's. You know, it's right out of inspiration, but as an encouragement. And I'm going to read it just like it reads. And it says, after almost dying twice, I gave up processed foods, and only eating these recipes, I was able to get off a dozen dangerous medications in only 4 weeks. Diabetes, kidney failure, congestive heart failure, and water gain by following God's principles in this book. I couldn't believe it. Now, I had heard a lot of testimonies. This one was profound. After I'd done classes, people would come up to me and say, you know, I lost 40 pounds, I lost 35 pounds, I lost 25 pounds. My blood pressure's gone down. I've had to change my medication. My cholesterol's gone down. I heard those things, you know, regularly, and it was always thrilling to hear those things. But I thought, wow, the Lord's program works. You know, this is a wonderful, wonderful blessing. I was asked to give classes. Well, the Lord, when we were still living in this big house that was perfectly suited for classes, on 3 different occasions, people said to me, I want you to give cooking classes. We really need classes. And then another one would say it, another one would say it. And oftentimes, I started to see a pattern that when the Lord wanted me to do something, he would bring it to me from 3 different sources, unrelated to each other. And, you know, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall be established. And so I thought, okay, I think the Lord is telling me something. I'm supposed to do some cooking classes. And I decided I was going to do them in our home, that I was going to do them for Adventists only this time, because I wanted to really use the principles right out of Counsel on Diet and Foods. And when you've got a mixed audience, you have to not give credit to that. And I wanted to show the Adventists right from the book these principles. And so I did announcements at 2 churches only, 2 Seventh-day Adventist churches. They were considered the most conservative of the area. They were kind of quasi-conservative. But on the opening night, we were quite pleased and surprised to see 22 people show up in our home. And so we did these classes once a week for 8 weeks. And one of the couples that came was, the man had co-started one of these churches that I had given the announcement in. And he and his wife came faithfully every single week. And after I finished this series, he said, I want you to do this series in my church. And so the following year, I did it in his church, and it was advertised to the public as a diabetes seminar, how to overcome diabetes. And I know I'm supposed to be done, but I'll be done quick. And so anyhow, we had this movie. He showed this movie by Dr. Milton Teskey on overcoming diabetes, and then the dentist, he was a dentist, this man, but he was the lay pastor of the church also. Then he announced to the people there that we were going to follow up with health classes and cooking classes, and he invited everybody to come. Well, one of the families that came was a homeschooling mother with her 3 children, whom she brought with her to every class. They were there faithfully every week. And she told me that after they would be at class the next morning in homeschool, they would discuss everything that they were learning in that class. And they were accepting everything, and they were making changes. And they were especially motivated because the oldest son had been born with Hashimoto's disease. He had not been thriving. He was very sickly, very small. They had had lots of problems. They had to build a non-toxic special house just to live in because he was so sensitive to environmental things and food and everything. And they'd had a lot of problems. And they had done a lot of research, and they were doing the very best they could for him. But they were still eating meat because they didn't know better, but they were using like organic grass-fed meat or animals and thought they were doing the very best. But when they learned the things that were in the class, they made the changes, they went off the meat, and their boy was thriving and improving, and they were so excited because this boy had been so sickly. And then after the 8 weeks were over, the mother came up to me and she said, "I've lost 40 pounds without trying. We're just enjoying the recipe so much." And it was such a blessing to have a testimony like that. And I just praise the Lord, that he did that. Well, I was pretty exhausted after this point. I said to the Lord, "I can't do this anymore." And I took a break. And he didn't bug me anymore. The doors did not open. Not probably a good idea, but that's how it was. Well, one more quick story. We moved to Homedale. And we started attending a church nearby, and let's see, what did they have me? Oh, we were involved in a health expo. We helped with a health expo there, and then they asked me to write articles for the website, and I did that. But when COVID hit, that church kind of went south. There were some serious problems that concerned us, and we just couldn't deal with it anymore. And so we went back to the other church that we had been at years before, and this is the church that the dentist had started, but now they were in a new church. And so we went back over there, and there were some new people that were transferring in that we were not familiar with, and we were meeting them, and they were just the nicest. One couple in particular were just so sweet and so nice. And then there was another family too. And I said to Dennis, "I think that we should invite them for Sabbath lunch. I want to get to know them better." And so we invited the one couple home for lunch, and they were really intrigued by the food that we served and asking questions and just seemed very interested. And then we invited the other family, and the children ended up not coming, but the mother came. The father was a Catholic, so he wasn't there. But this mother also was very intrigued, and all of these were Hispanic people. And so they started talking among themselves, and they decided that I needed to teach them how to eat and how to cook. And so they said, "Would you do classes for us?" And so that turned into a set of classes, and this one couple in particular just ran with this message. They said, "There is no health reform in the Hispanic churches at all. Nobody knows any of this." This couple was eating meat, dairy, you name it. They were eating anything. They didn't know the health message. They didn't know anything about it. It was so sad. And so they were so eager to learn. And so I went through the classes, I made all these changes, and the next thing I know is she decides to start a class at the church teaching the book, Counsel on Diets and Foods. And she just finished after 2 years of going through that. For 2 years, they taught this book. And besides that, during this time, the Lord opened the doors for him to start speaking online to Hispanic groups. I don't know how it started, but the Lord opened the doors, and he started sharing the three angels' messages. He started sharing righteousness by faith and health reform to Hispanic Adventists all over the world. The Lord also opened the door for him to speak at this church, this English-speaking church that we had been at, and he is an excellent preacher. Now this couple are so humble. They're as humble as they come, and the sweetest people. And the Lord is using him in a powerful way. And now she's giving health nuggets when he preaches. She's doing a phenomenal job. They are both excellent speakers. And I just marvel at what the Lord has done with them. Dennis, I forgot to bring up Counsel on Diet and Foods. Would you bring it up real quick? It's in the bag. There's just a one-line quote I want to read to you as an encouragement because the Lord fulfilled that with this couple. And just to encourage you. Thank you so much. This is on page 111. While sitting at the table, we may do medical missionary work by eating and drinking to the glory of God. Little did we know that just by having a simple meal with these people, what it would lead to, what the Lord has done with this couple. This all happened after that. It's amazing what the Lord is doing. We're at the end of time, and He is working in a mighty way, taking humble people and putting them to work. It says He'll take people from the plow, right? This is just he's a painter. He has a painting business, They're just humble, sweet people, and they are being used so powerfully all over the world. And so I just want to encourage you that the Lord has a work for all of us. He said all of us are to be medical missionaries. If He can take a country girl from Wisconsin, just an ignorant little girl, and do what He has done and lead the way He has led in my life, He can do it for any of us. The key is we have to want it. We have to be open. There's a quote in Great Controversy that says, "But Christ still intercedes in man's behalf, and light will be given to those who seek it." He wants to do that for us. We just have to be open. And even though I wasn't calling out to Him when I was a Lutheran and asking Him because I didn't know He had anything to do with health, Our scripture reading, "Call unto me and answer thee and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not." And in the margin for mighty it says hidden things that thou knowest not. He fulfilled that. Even though I wasn't verbally crying out to Him, He knew what was in my heart, that I wanted to learn more. And He answered that unspoken prayer in so many ways. I can't believe what He's done. Now, He's done a whole lot more, but those are many more stories, and I'm way over time. And so I just want to give praise for His leading, for His guiding, what He has done, because it's all Him. And we just went along for the ride. And so I just praise the Lord, and my prayer is that He'll work in all of our hearts and help us to all become medical missionaries, because time is short. Remember that medical missionary work and the publishing work are the last two works to go through at the end of time. And there's going to be a great need as the cities crumble and the Lord continues, the judgments. There's going to be a greater need for medical missionary work in this world. So praise the Lord for that.